coming. Just to set the stage, I want this to be like an open discussion. I don't have too much to talk about to present. So the goal of today's gathering is to discuss what we have, what we're going to have. I will, share what we have right now. I will show something in action, and also share some of the future plans as well. But generally speaking, we're here to discuss. I want to hear as much feedback as possible because this is a new project, this is a new development, and there are a lot of moving pieces right now. And any feedback is, of course, valuable and will likely influence the future development. So with that, let me just quickly, if you have any questions along the road, just stop me and we can discuss some of those things. So let me share the the current state and the current status first of the Ignite 3. So Ignite 3, as you probably know, started like last year, around October or something. So that's when we started all the discussions, initial discussions, and around the process, around what should be the scope of the next major release and all that. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that we kind of established this process for the Ignite 3, and it's being developed in this separate repository. The link is here. So the idea is, again, for those who are not following those devless discussions, is that essentially we want to kind of reorganize the code base, to modernize it a little bit, to get rid of that technical debt that we have. And for that, we basically just created a brand new empty repository, and we're building everything there, quote unquote, from scratch. We're obviously not creating the whole product from scratch. We will port a lot of existing code from to the DEX where this is applicable. But like structurally, this is kind of a new project that we're working on in this repository. So what we have right now, so the alpha release that has been released recently, beginning of January, has like first basic features that we think are the foundation for the future Ignite 3. So first of all, this is the configuration framework. So one of the changes that we expect in Ignite 3.0 is essentially a new approach to configuration. Ignite 2.x has essentially static configuration where you provide the configuration either in configuration files, in XML files, or in code snippets. And this configuration is provided on the startup of a node, right? And there are certain like knobs here and there for some of the parameters that allow to change those parameters, but there is no consistency. And generally speaking, no consistency in how those parameters are updated, no consistency in behavior. Like it can depend on whether you have persistence or not, for example. It can depend on some other factors as well. So we decided that we should kind of unify the whole approach around configuration and fix that usability issues that we have there. So the basic configuration framework is available right now in this alpha release. What it allows to do is basically create like a tree-like hierarchy of parameters and work with them. And I'll show how it works. Then there is the basic Crest protocol. Again, one of the ideas that we have is that essentially all the operations will be exposed through a REST API. It will be used by the CLI tool, which I will show and talk about as well in a second, but it can also be used by any other tools. Like if you want to integrate with external tools, that's how you can do that. So we are building some foundation for that REST API. So kind of unified REST API with unified clear API that you can use for any kind of operations. And for now, it only supports this configuration-related functionality, but in the future, it will expand to other things. The node runner module is essentially kind of just a startup for a node. Right now, the node is empty, so to speak, meaning that it doesn't have any actual Ignite functionality that we're used to. There are no caches, there is no compute, there's no discovery even for now, or communication between those nodes. So it's just a process that will incorporate all those different features in the future. We're using that to demonstrate how you will work with those nodes, how you will start and stop them, and things like that. And finally, and probably the most important, is the CLI tool. This is kind of a cornerstone of the usability improvements that we're trying to make in Ignite 3.0. The CLI tool, the idea behind the CLI tool is that it will be like a single entry point for everything related to Ignite. So when you go to the website, instead of like download a huge zip file with a bunch of stuff, you download a CLI tool, which is just a lightweight binary executable, essentially. And then you do everything else for the CLI tool. You install any core artifacts or external dependencies using this tool. You start and stop nodes using this tool. You do the operations using this tool, and it will use the REST API that I've mentioned before. And we can add a lot of different things into this tool. Obviously, can generate like project stops for you or some configurations. Can generate examples, maybe. Like, we can do any kind of stuff there, and this is up to discussion, of course. So the alpha release, again, so all those different modules that I've just listed, they kind of create, we thought it's a good milestone to show to the community, because it kind of demonstrates all the major mechanics of how Ignite will be downloaded, delivered, how you will interact with it in the future when we release the major release. So it gives kind of this, sneak peek into the future of Ignite. So we thought it might be a good idea to have an alpha release that anyone can download and play with it. So today I will show this in action. So I'll stop talking here, and I'll just go to the demo part. Any questions so far before I go into the demo? All right, no questions. So, Senia, do you see the website right now?
Yes, I do see the website. And
right.
Guys, you can as well type your questions in the chat, or just unmute yourself in one of the breaks.
All right, perfect. So, so the best way to try it out, to try the alpha release out, is just to go to the website, to the Apache Ignite website, which is obviously ignite.apache.org. So I will click this Get Started button here, which will actually take me to the documentation, our technical documentation, which describes all the features of Ignite and all that. So here there is a drop-down at the top of the page, which allows to choose the version you're interested in, which is 2.9.1 by default, because this is the latest stable release. But I will go to the 3.0 -alpha. This is the one I'm interested in here. And I will dive right into the getting started guide, because that's the most important and interesting part. So this page basically guides you through like some steps that you can go through on your own, and just to get some feeling about what the CLI tool is, and how you will work with it, how the Ignite 3 will work. So let's just go through the steps, and I will, of course, give some additional comments as well. So the first part is the installation, right? So the installation is very straightforward. Again, as I mentioned, essentially we will just download the CLI tool instead of downloading the whole thing with a lot of jar files and a lot of some additional things that you don't actually need. We'll download the CLI tool, which is just a single file. So I'll create a folder. Where's my terminal? Here we go. So I'll create a folder, just an empty folder, which is called Ignite3, and I will switch to that folder. This is just to isolate the installation, nothing else. And then I will download the CLI tool. Yeah, and the only thing that you should keep in mind here is that the syntax of commands obviously changes when you switch between different terminals, whether it's Bash or any other Unix, Linux-based terminal, or like under Windows, if you use PowerShell, you should click here, and it will give you the correct syntax for all the commands. All right, so let's download it. It just uses this URL and goes to the apache.org and downloads the correct file. Should be very fast download because, as I said, it's a single file. So the only thing that is left is to update the path variable, just for me to be able to run this command from anywhere in the terminal. So at this point, the installation of the CLI tool is complete, and we can execute some commands, and we can try using it. So first and foremost, let's just verify that it works, right? And for that, I will just run the ignite command without any parameters like this, and it should show me like the initial help and essentially the list of commands that are currently available. So again, at this point, this is the functionality is limited. The set of commands that we have is, of course, limited to what we have available in the release. So what we have right now is we have the init command, which I will describe in a little bit more detail. Essentially, it kind of installs the core artifacts if you want to run local nodes. Then there is the set of commands to work with modules. Well, I will also show that as well. It essentially allows you to install and uninstall optional Ignite modules. Remember, like with Ignite 2.x, you need to copy those jar files manually from the optional folder to the libs folder if you want to enable certain modules. The same with any external dependencies or with your code that you want to add to the class path, you essentially just need to copy those jar files to the libs folder, which is a lot of manual work, and it's a little bit error prone, of course. So in Ignite 3, you will manage that from the CLI tool instead of doing those manual operations. The set of commands to work with nodes, start, stop, local node, and do some management there. And also a couple of commands related to configuration, which allows you to read the configuration and update the configuration. So I will show all those commands in a second. So and yeah, just to mention, for any command you can use this syntax with -- help option, which allows you to see like the detailed help for any command with all the options and parameters that are required and all that. So if I do like ignite init -- help, for example, it will show me the help for this particular command. All right, so let's dive into the actual operations. So I will start with installing Ignite artifacts and doing some dependencies as well. So just to clarify, so the CLI tool essentially has two purposes, right? When you install it, you can use it to manage and to run operations on an existing cluster, which can be remote right away, right? So it will be able to connect to a remote cluster and update the configuration parameter, for example. You don't need to do any additional installations for that. But the second purpose is like essentially management of the local installation of Ignite itself, like running local nodes, managing those local nodes, starting and stopping them, managing the class path of those nodes that you run locally on this machine with the CLI tool installed. And if you want to use the CLI tool for that, we need to install the Ignite core artifacts first, because we currently have only the CLI tool itself installed. We don't have any actual Ignite jar files. And that's what the Ignite Init command actually does. So if I run Ignite Init, it will actually go to the Maven Central repository and download all the artifacts that are required with any dependencies that might be needed. And as the help that I've shown before suggests here, you can also provide your own repository. So if you have Ignite, if your organization doesn't have direct access to Maven Central, but instead uses some internal proxy where you deploy those artifacts that you need, you can provide the repository URL here, and it will go into that repository instead of using Maven Central. So this is also possible. All right, so at this point we have Ignite core artifacts deployed, and it actually suggests that I can use the Ignite node start command to run a node. But before that, let's see what we can do with external dependencies. So just as an example, let's assume that we want to use Guava as a part of compute, for example. And we want it to be statically deployed on the class path and available at all times. So for that, we can use the module add command, which actually supports both adding optional Ignite modules, like predefined modules, as well as any external dependencies using this MDN syntax. So essentially, all you need is to provide the Maven coordinates, group ID, artifact ID, and version, and it will again go to the Maven Central or to the repository that you can also provide here using the REPA option, and we'll download it and properly install it. Again, we don't need to manually do anything, right? So you do everything from here, from the CLI tool. And yeah, and finally, there is the Ignite module list command that shows me the dependencies and modules that are currently installed. So let's see what we have there. And as expected, we have Guava installed, which means that Guava will be on the class path of any node that I start from this CLI tool going forward. So regarding the optional Ignite modules, the thing is that currently there are no actual artifacts for Ignite 3.0. So it's kind of this functionality is kind of disabled. But the idea is that any Ignite module, you will be able to install or uninstall any Ignite module using the same Ignite module command, which will be something like Ignite module add, and then you just provide the name of that module, like Ignite AWS, for example, for those integrations with the S3 discovery and whatnot that we have in that module. So that's how you will do this. All right, so at this point we can go into starting nodes. Again, this is very straightforward. There is the node start command. And the only thing that we currently need to provide is a consistent ID. This is, by the way, an arguable thing. We currently require that, but probably this will go away in the future, but we'll see how it goes. So the idea here is that we run the Ignite node start command, providing a unique ID. Essentially, it can be any string here. The only requirement is that it's unique across all those nodes. So let's do that. So it actually starts like an external process using that node runner module that I've mentioned before. And for that external process, it shows me the process ID as well as the path to the log file generated by that node. And to see the list of nodes that are currently running, you can use the node list command, which shows just a table with listing all the nodes that are currently running. So as expected, we have one node and it shows the consistent ID, which is my first node, the process ID, and the log file. And the log file is actually quite convenient because you can use any tool available to look at the log file. In the future, we probably will have that incorporated into the CLI tool as well, but at this point, I can just use the cat command and see what is going on with the node. So as you can see, it by the way starts that REST protocol that I've mentioned before, which we will now use for the configuration related commands. Now, so yeah, let's do some operations. So as I said, in terms of operations, we have the configuration commands that can read the configuration and update the configuration. That also kind of demonstrates how the configuration framework operate. So let's start with the config get command, which if you run it without any parameters and without any options, will just give the full configuration tree from the node, from the cluster. So the configuration currently, I mean, it displays it in a JSON format right now, because essentially there is no formatting right now at all there. That's how it comes to the CLI tool from the REST API. But we kind of internally are transitioning to the Hawken format, which is a library from Lightband. It is basically a superset of JSON, which is more like human readable and more suitable for this kind of configuration purposes. And it's also, it obviously is compatible with JSON, and it's also compatible with Java properties format as well. So from like user's perspective, you essentially will be able to use any of those formats, either JSON or Hawken itself, which probably will be the preferred one, or you can use the Java properties as well if that's your preference. So that's the whole tree. You can also do like you can also use the -- selector option, which allows you to filter this out and to get like a subtree or an individual parameter. So you can use like local.baseline, for example, right? So that's the local, which is kind of the top element, and then we have the baseline right here. And doing that, I expect to have this subtree of the parameters right here. So let's see what it provides. Yeah, so as expected, it essentially showed everything that is under this local baseline element. So we can filter it out this way. All right, so that's the config get command. So now let's see how we can update it. So for updating the configuration, we have the config set parameter, which basically accepts any configuration that you want to be applied. Again, it can be an individual parameter. It can be like a whole tree of parameters or a subtree. So here we will update this local baseline auto adjustment timeout, which is currently 10,000, which we can see here or here as well. And that's the current value, which we have read from the node. We will update it with 20,000 instead. So that's all you need to do to update a parameter. Just to run config set parameter command and providing the new values. And if we run this get command again, and here we'll provide a selector with just actual parameter just to see the value. It should show us that it's now 20,000. Yep, as expected. So again, the idea here is that the CLI tool, with the combination of the configuration framework that we currently have, it will allow you to update any parameters in runtime. You don't need to restart the nodes. There is no downtime. So if the parameter can be changed in runtime, you will just do this from the CLI tool like this. And hopefully in the future we'll be able to make as many parameters actually dynamic as possible. But the foundation is definitely there. All we need to do now is to support this dynamic nature of certain parameters in the product, in those components who are using those parameters. Yeah, so that's basically it for the commands that we have. The only thing left is to stop the node. Again, this is of course very straightforward. All we need to do is just run the node stop command, providing the same consistent ID that we have used before to start the node. So let's stop it. And now if I do the node list command once again, we'll see that there are no locally running nodes. So the stop was successful. So so that's it. Any questions before I
Yes,
forward?
thank you, Val. We have question from the chat. What about running all that in Kubernetes?
Yeah, so right now we don't have any, obviously the Ignite 2.x has quite a bit of integration with Kubernetes, including like all the Docker images and whatnot. And whatever is applicable will be ported to Ignite 3. So we're not losing that. In this version, there is nothing, natively available. What we will have is we will have whatever we currently have in 2.x. We'll have all those different images that you can use and all that. The CLI tool will probably, again, we can discuss different ideas here, and if you guys have anything in mind, let's talk about that. One of my ideas was that essentially the CLI tool can generate kind of Docker images or something that you can use for further delivery, for further deployment. Like you can do some settings here, you can install modules and all that, and then you can generate a Docker image, for example, something like that. Again, this is kind of a idea from the top of my head. It's not designed or anything. But again, these are the things that we can definitely discuss. If you guys have any concerns, especially in terms of like usability of running Ignite in Kubernetes, we can absolutely discuss that and kind of project it to the Ignite 3 and see how we can apply it there. Anything else? Any other questions in the chat?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Oh, I see the another one. In one of the past meetings, there was talk about removing distributed logs, semaphores, queues. What this would be part of 3.0?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the discussion around explicit logs, I don't think it actually went anywhere at this point. So we can resurrect it. Yeah, there was kind of a suggestion to remove them because in the way they're implemented now, I think they've caused some just technical issues. And the question is whether we want to fix them or we want to remove them. As for the data structures, I would definitely prefer them to remain in the product as a feature, although we probably will rework it in a certain way, and I will actually cover that to a certain extent when I talk about like future plans and other stuff. So. And again, like generally speaking, all those things are up to discussion, right? So we have like a basic scope of the changes that we want to have. As for the existing features that we whether want to like port as is, especially when we talk about this kind of miscellaneous features, right? Not actual like data storage, compute, or like all those basic core features, which we obviously kind of understand how they will exist in 3.0. Miscellaneous features like data structures and things like that. These are the things that are still under discussion, and feel free to participate in those discussions. So yeah, so before we go into like open discussion, I wanted to share some of the future plans as well. Go back to the. So you see the Google Slides, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, just making sure. Yeah, so some of the next steps and some of the future plans, kind of more of a short-term plan that that is currently there. So essentially, what we want to achieve as a next milestone is essentially having another alpha release, which will incorporate more of a functional product, right? Something that will allow us to build a cluster and have some data storage and whatnot, and to work with it with so basically so that it's closer to the Ignite we're used to. So for that, there are kind of two major building blocks, I would say. The first one, and there is a lot of development there, by the way. So if you want to participate, that would be great. So essentially, the first one is what we call common replication infrastructure. So what we currently have in 2.x, so this is more about like the internal architecture and how things work internally in Ignite. There are essentially kind of several different approaches and several different components that essentially do the same thing. They replicate the data across the nodes. So there is the actual like partitioning, like in caches. We replicate the data across partitions. That's one protocol, separate protocol. There is the meta store and some metadata which is being distributed across the nodes, and it is partially distributed through discovery and through discovery messaging, which goes to like across the ring of those nodes, and partially through the system caches, which are essentially based on the first protocol, of course. But so we kind of use the caching functionality internally in Ignite to distribute some metadata. Data structures as well, they partially are based on caches, partially are also using some other mechanisms. So there's kind of the whole like zoo of those different protocols and different components that essentially are doing the same thing. So this is something that, first of all, we want to fix, and we want to unify that. And also we want to switch to a more like modern protocols for that, that would be beneficial for our data storage in terms of like split brain protection, and in terms of being able to deploy on multi-cloud environments and whatnot. So for that, we want to create this common replication infrastructure that will be used for all those different tasks. And that's why I mentioned data structures before, by the way. So essentially, ideally, the data structures, if we keep them as a feature, which I think we should, they should be reworked to use this replication infrastructure under the hood instead of relying on some other things. So this replication infrastructure will be based, at least it looks like, based on the current discussions that we have, will be based on the Raft protocol for replication itself, and also on Swim for protocol for group membership. So these are protocols that we have all the libraries for. So it's kind of they're battle tested and all that. So it's relatively straightforward to use them and to utilize for our purposes. Although obviously there is a lot of development that we need to do there. All this described in the proposal number 61. So if you were interested in like deeper technical details, just go there. It has all the information. So that's the first building block, right? The second block is Schema Manager. Again, this is one of the kind of the cornerstones of Ignite 3, because the way Ignite 2.x works with schemas is painful. It's one of the biggest usability issues that we have, right? Caches are essentially schemaless historically because they were used just as caches, as key value storages where you can put essentially anything. We also have SQL on top of caches, which introduces SQL schema, of course, which you can manually update and manually create. And then there is the binary object schema, which is created automatically, like internally. User does not interact with it, doesn't affect the schema. It's created when when you serialize something. So if there is a discrepancy between those two, you get weird behavior. It's hard to understand, how to update the SQL schema as well, whether you need to restart the nodes or not, and so it's kind of convoluted. So this is one of the usability issues that we have, and the Schema Manager building block is essentially what tries to fix it using what we call a schema-first approach, or kind of schema-based architecture. So the idea behind this approach is that we'll have like a single schema for every table or for every cache that we will have in the data storage, and all the data must be always satisfy that schema. So if you update something, the data needs to be updated as well. So there is this is actually currently in progress. The development is in progress. We already have like a PR for the schema creation API. I'm not sure about update API, probably only for creation right now, but I'm not sure. Also, there is a bunch of data serialization and deserialization things that need to be implemented. Again, I think they're implemented already to a certain extent at least. So this is kind of a new serialization protocol for the data itself, right? So the storage now will work with essentially kind of data tuples or data records, and we need a new serialization mechanism for that. And then it will have to be integrated with the meta storage, which will be based on that common replication infrastructure. So this is kind of combines all this together, because the schemas, they need to be replicated across the node so that every node knows the schema for every table and for every cache. Therefore, this replication infrastructure will be used for schema metadata information replication. So once we have those two blocks, we can do a lot of different stuff. Actually, we can build a lot on top of that. And the first thing that I think naturally we will do is essentially an in-memory atomic data store, because again, we will reuse the replication infrastructure for actual data replication within a partition. We'll use the Schema Manager for defining schemas and updating them so that you can create those tables and change and alter those tables. And that would create the in-memory atomic data store. The only thing is left there is like all the affinity related and data distribution aspect of that. So and that would likely be like this alpha 2 version, alpha 2 release, because we feel like that it's a very good milestone, again, to share with the community, to share with the public, so that anyone can try it out. And after that, we'll do everything else, which includes persistence. And after we create this atomic data store, actually, there is a lot of like porting from Ignite to the DEX, because like before that, it's essentially all the new development. But after we do this atomic data store, we have a lot code that we can just take from 2.x with minimal changes and reuse it. That includes persistence. Transactions, probably not so much. We might use some new protocols there, but again, probably some of the code can be reused as well. Compute grid will probably be just moved as is. Again, data structures, they might be reused as an API and like major pieces, but they probably should be reworked to reuse the common replication infrastructure, and so on. There are many features obviously that we have, continuous queries like near caches, services, which are mostly can be just moved from Ignite 2.x to 3.x without changes or with minimal changes. But again, before that, we need those two building blocks, which are kind of which are the foundation for everything else. So this is these are the first in the list. So with that, we can discuss, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So as I've mentioned, we are looking for any feedback. Like, if you have any questions or concerns or suggestions for Ignite 3 and that you would like to share, and after the meeting that we have here, just go to this link and it will basically take you to the user forum thread where we gather all that, and just leave your message there, and we'll accumulate everything and we'll consider that in our future development. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we can.
And we have one in the chat. If I understood correctly, it will be possible to make non-breaking schema changes without restarting the cluster, right?
Correct. Yes. So that's surely one of the goals that we want to achieve. So this Schema Manager will, again, I think I've mentioned so this is the proposal number 54, which also describes like whole different details there, including some of examples of what you will be able to do. But yeah, the short answer is yes. The flow will be the following, right? So you will create a schema first, or like a table with a schema, either using DDL if you're like SQL-oriented use case, or maybe just using Java API, which will also be available. Probably, I'm sure we'll have something on the CLI tool for that as well. So you will create a schema and a table along with that schema, and any data that you insert into that table must be compliant with the schema, right? Basically, that's exactly how any relational database work as well. And then you will be able to alter those tables using the same API and make compatible changes. So if you do some change that, if you remove a column, for example, then the data from that column needs to be either removed or maybe at least marked as removed and all that. And if you change the type of the column as well, we can do some conversions. So the idea is that the data must be compliant with the schema at all times.
And we have a question. In the future, can we have similar features like Apache Geode? Will there be any overlap?
Which features? I mean, there is a lot of overlap, I'm sure. Are there any particular features that you're interested in? Because yeah, I mean, generally speaking, Apache Geode is it's comes from Gemfire, which was like the in-memory data fabric, or is rather. So there is a lot of functional overlap between Ignite and Gemfire or Geode, and
we want to use as integration hub. So curious, that seems to be the same.
Yeah, so I mean that's probably one of the overlaps. I mean Ignite is used for data integration hubs quite heavily, I would say. as much as we can tell that about data integration hubs, which is quite a new thing, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, we have like, we have persistence, we have, SQL support, we have all the different integrations with like streaming platforms, as well as, like CDC integration and this kind of thing. So yeah, kind of like Ignite definitely can be used for data integration hubs. And this is one of the use cases that Ignite is used for. And that's not going to change. This is true for Ignite 2.x and will be true for Ignite 3 for sure. So yeah, I mean, I don't see any issue with that. I mean, again, if there is any particular functionality that you think is missing in Ignite that might, make the building of a data integration hub easier for you or whatnot, then yeah, let me know and we can discuss.
And we have a question about migration, the hot topic, I think, next year. If we use persistence in 2.9, would it upgrade to 3.0 require, or it will require manual migration? What is the tentative time frame for the release?
Yeah, so, okay, so first one, I don't have an exact answer yet. I mean, obviously, this will be a little bit different data format, so we'll have some changes there because there are some incompatible changes that we want to do just to fix some things. So I would say that some data migration will be needed for sure. I don't think you will be able just to reuse the the data files as is without any changes. But what that migration would actually imply exactly, I don't know yet. So maybe we will have some manual tools that some tooling that will allow to migrate the data. Maybe something else. Obviously, you can always like run two clusters alongside and move the data from one cluster to another cluster. So there will be a way, I'm sure. Although at this point, I cannot tell what exactly that would be. So that's answering the first question. As for the release date, I mean, obviously, this as a community-driven development, it's hard to predict exactly when we will have an actual like GA release. I think based on the scope and and the pace of the development that we have right now, I think we're looking at something like end of the year, maybe start of the next year, for at least like the major functionality that we're looking for. It might be missing some of the miscellaneous features at that point, and we will just be adding them going forward. So again, it will be up to the community when to release the actual release and what to include in that release, right?
But we definitely will consider the migration question, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, I mean, I'm just from technical perspective, I don't know what will be required. I don't exactly know what kind of changes we will have in this data format and whatnot, and what kind of migration will be needed. Maybe we'll be able to just manipulate those files to also or do something like that. Maybe we will just need to, as I said, run the second cluster alongside with the first one and just move the data. Maybe we'll have some tooling for that. I don't really know. Like I can tell with some confidence that there will be some migration required, because as I said, I do expect some incompatible changes that will force us to do some manual migration step when you upgrade from 2.x to 3.x. But again, what exactly that would be, I don't know. But it surely will be considered, and I'm sure we will have a way, recommended way to do that. I will just just encourage everyone, just go through this getting started guide, download the build, play with it. maybe go beyond the guide as well, just to see how it works. And again, like any feedback is appreciated.